My name is Elena. I was born in Washington, D.C. When I was 5, I moved to Christchurch, New Zealand, which is a very small rural town in the middle of nowhere, where I went to school until I was about 12 years old, and then I moved to a bigger city in New Zealand. And then right in the middle of high school, I moved back to the U.S. I spent 1 year in Washington, D.C., and then I moved to Los Angeles, where I have been for the past 5 years before coming to New York to study medicine. When I first came back to the U.S., I had a very, very thick New Zealand accent. Nobody could understand what I was saying. And over a period of years, it kind of phased out. But New Zealand tends to be a little bit like Northern European countries. It's very liberal and progressive, and they have this attitude that they don't really interfere in other people's lives because it's not really your business. So people live as they want to live. And when I came back to the U.S., it was sort of the mid to late 90s, and I discovered in high school that there were these social norms and these social rules that I didn't understand. Like girls couldn't do this and boys couldn't do that, and boys and girls couldn't relate to each other in this way and that way, and boys and girls couldn't be alone together. And it was like a culture shock for me, a huge culture shock for me, because the country I'd come from, nobody really paid much attention to it. It just wasn't a big deal. Some people dated really young and some people didn't date really young, but it wasn't because of any outside social pressure. There was no religious focus on sex, for example. When I first came back and I heard sex and God used in the same context, I was confused. I had no idea what they were talking about or why it would be such a big deal, despite the fact that New Zealand is a Christian country and I was raised somewhat religiously. It just was never part of it. And it was just totally confusing to me. I really didn't know what to do. It took me probably took me 5 years to really assimilate. And then by the time I'd gone back to New Zealand, I've been back 3 times since I left. I realized because I have an American accent, and probably I've adopted a lot of American attitudes towards success and hard work. Not that people in New Zealand don't work hard, but there's just a different attitude. Success is seen differently. That I'm just not a New Zealander anymore. I came back here as a New Zealander 100%, and I'm now not really American, but I'm not really a Kiwi. All my friends back home are married and have kids. I'm 27. All of them. Not a single girl that I went to school with doesn't have children. And to them, it's insane that I'm single, and that I would want to be a doctor, and that I would want to put that before having children. But there's also a lot about that I really admire. I sort of feel like I connect with that kind of family attitude, but they don't see me as part of that world anymore, which is strange. My culture changes depending on how I feel that day, who I feel I am that day. I'm Italian American, and probably more than anything, I've had to hold on to those roots because I think in the U.S. people can feel kind of lost and not really know what their culture is. So I think I would identify myself primarily as that, that I identify with that kind of larger family, more chaotic way of life than a country's culture. Because the countries that I've been from have, Caucasian type cultures are not that different from one another in certain ways. But not like an Italian culture, but an Italian American culture, which is completely different. I went to Italy for a little while and I was shocked that it was a completely different place, because Italian Americans left 100 years ago and those are the same norms that they still have. Italy moved on, but the people here didn't. So I also lived in Cyprus and in Spain and in Australia and the Bahamas. My grandparents and I moved around a lot for various family reasons, but in the Bahamas, the one thing I remember is everybody talking about how I was the only white kid, but I didn't realize what that meant. I didn't know what they were talking about because everybody looked the same, so I thought I looked like them. And I remember it was a much bigger deal for my grandparents, and I didn't realize, I think until 5 or 6 years later, looking back, what that meant, that I was not black. And I was oh yeah, oh really?